Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge, not wholly or in full measure, but very substantially. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.
The world of geopolitics is complex. It encapsulates foreign policy, defense, trade, and culture. These can have ripples that can be felt all around the planet.
With that, we welcome you to The Global Detail, a podcast where we go beyond borders and behind the headlines to stories that impact the world.
Our goal is to peel the onion and explore the various diverse layers through riveting interviews with experts and stalwarts. I'm Akshobh Giridharadas.
And co-piloting this journey, I'm Brendan Duke. Let's get into it. August 2022 marks the 75th year of independence for the world's largest secular democracy of India. It also marks the creation of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, which was carved out of the Indian subcontinent. These countries share a common history of colonial rule, a mutual affinity for cricket and cinema, as well as a similar culinary palate. They also share a turbulent history of violent partition, 3 brutal wars, and multiple border skirmishes. Added to this are geopolitical standoffs, contention over nuclear arms, trade embargoes, and visa restrictions, not to mention a few kerfuffles at the United Nations and the International Court of Justice. Pakistan prides itself on being the only country to be carved out in the name of Islam, and it is also the only Muslim nation to have nuclear weapons. But most importantly, as mentioned in previous episodes, while most states have an army, in Pakistan, it can be said the army has a state. Our very own Akshobh Giridharadas, a native of Mumbai, India, spoke with Wajahat S, a noted Pakistani journalist working for Nikkei Asia in New York City. Together, they try to unpack the sordid and complex history of the India-Pakistan relationship and Pakistan's identity as a nation-state.
75 years of Indian independence, Pakistan independence, 75 years of frostiness between India and Pakistan. So, the subcontinent is normally a time to celebrate with 75 years, but it's after 75 years later, we're still, at the Stephen Cohen prophecy of a 100-year war. Where would you classify this relationship that you've seen?
It's a complicated commemoration, isn't it? The Diamond Jubilee of the partition at a time when it's difficult to muster it, because if one were to do a counterfactual, a united India would have been today the world's largest country. That in itself would have been quite a promise. But a divided India, firstly, I say, and I make this point not just to Indian and Pakistani friends, but everyone, that, India and Pakistan get away with murder by pretending to be the only 2 victims of partition. There is, frankly, partition didn't just happen in 47. Partition happened somewhere between the 30s and the 50s, and it kept on happening. And there are, according to my count, and I may be wrong, but I'm open to any historians challenging this. In a way, there's 7, 8 victims of partition, starting with Afghanistan, and Myanmar in the east, Afghanistan in the west, Nepal, Bhutan in the north, Sri Lanka in the south, India and Pakistan, Bangladesh in the middle. Indians and Pakistanis usually obsess over the rights and the wrongs of partition, and then it becomes a classic India-Pakistan debate. But frankly, there's other stakeholders of the subcontinent's breakup, thanks to British interventionism and colonialism. It's only ironic that we're speaking in English, and I am in London, about partition and its and British legacy. But in a way, it saddens me that this just becomes an India-Pakistan conversation and not a conversation about other countries which still live under the dark shadow of colonial whimsy. Myanmar, dominated by a military today, a junta, which is very much premised on the powerful British Indian military, which used to rule it at one point. Myanmar was Burma. Burma was a part of India. We know this. Afghanistan, complete disaster in so many ways and words. The 40-year-old war has now become a year of the Taliban's rule, the second coming. And still, you can see how it is a part and parcel of the subcontinent, and yet the colonial legacy there is so complicated to just muster in just the show. But I would say that this is a very, very large topic, and making the topic just about India and Pakistan, while it is your ambit, for me is a disservice to the larger subcontinent. First of all, because it's not just about you and me. It's not just about India and Pakistan. It's a larger problem. It's about the world's largest population, what could have been. And then the second part really is who was the loser and who was the winner of partition. And that's an easily settled debate, much easily settled in the first part. India clearly has done a remarkable job, despite of its hiccups, which India is experiencing these days under Mr. Modi's Hindu supremacist nationalism of the BJP. India has become the world's fifth largest economy, and it's taken this May, India surpassed the UK to become a $3.3 trillion economy. It took 75 years for India to beat its colonial master at what its colonial master wanted to be, which is one of the world's biggest economies. Now, officially, the world's fifth largest economy is India, not the UK. Ironic, beautiful, sublime, if you are an Indian. And as for the Pakistanis, well, their experiments with martial law, proxy war, civil war, assassinations, self-flagellation, self-destruction, they haven't paid off. The Pakistanis are some of the smartest, yet some of the most underutilized people in the world. The economy is in tatters. They're just at this very day, till in this very month, they are, while they're commemorating the 75th year of independence, they're also negotiating the 23rd bailout with the IMF. They're one of the most bailed out and broke countries in the world. Not much of a statistic for a country which was supposed to be the pride of Asia in the 50s and 60s, which was giving economic advice to the South Koreans and the Japanese and the Emiratis and the Saudis around 4 or 5 decades ago. Quite sad.
Yeah, absolutely, Wajahat. Now you've obviously unlocked Pandora's box there. And just on your point about India overtaking the UK, former colony overtaking the empire, so the empire does, strike back in some ways. I think before I go to Pakistan, because obviously you're such a good Pakistani historian, let's talk about the partition story, because a lot of people in the West still don't understand how a British barrister, Cyril Radcliffe, who had not been east of Paris, drew a line and cutting families neighbors that lived side by side with each other. As he drew a line on the map, bloodlines were being cut because, Hindu, Muslim, Sikhs all turned on each other. What should have been a 2-year project was done in 36 days. And things like Lahore, until the crown jewel of Pakistan today and Punjab, only Mountbatten Radcliffe knew it was. Just take us back to partition, because my grandfather was a journalist and he told me he had colleagues who had seen what happened in Auschwitz, in Warsaw Ghetto, the horror crimes of World War II. And they saw what happened in the Punjab of, 15 million people crossing over, 1.5 million people dying, never to come across. And yet, like so many other things in the Western lexicon, like Churchill's war crimes, all this remains to be forgotten.
Yeah, so there's so much has been debated about partition and about the role of the individuals who shaped it and formed it. But it really boils down to the last few months. In 47, a new viceroy, which was Mountbatten, the Queen's cousin. Jinnah, the to-be Pakistani founder, once a senior member of the All Indian National Congress, but then rubbed the wrong way by the Gandhis and the Nehrus of the world, and pretty much overnight became a Muslim nationalist of sorts. M.K. Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru themselves, of course. And in a way, if you really do the individual analysis, it ultimately became a bit of a three-way between Jinnah, Nehru, and Mountbatten. And of course, the other bureaucrats like Cyril Ratcliffe that you name, who participated in the end game. But in a way, it was quite sad. Recent discoveries of mine have led me to be quite shocked that, we look at partition as this long, drawn process. Most of us study it in school and college as something which started in the early 1900s, reforms, limited democracy, elections, World War I, Khilafat movement, World War II, the rise of the Indian National Congress, the Muslim League, the Pakistan Resolution, the Pakistan movement, blah, blah. It's like a 40, 50-year-old, car crash in slow motion. That's how we study it. That's how we are supposed to study it across the border in India and Pakistan, of course, with institutional biases of both education systems built in. But really, what's shocking for me is that it really boiled down to the last few weeks, the last few days even, of partition. They were so heady. The personal and interpersonal failures and connections there. Mountbatten didn't like Jinnah. Mountbatten really got along with Nehru. Mountbatten shared Plan Balkan with Nehru. He didn't share Plan Balkan, by the way, the plan to demarcate things and break them up, which involved the chap you just named, Ratcliffe. He shared it with Nehru and not with Jinnah. That gave Nehru a bit of a trump card to play, and gave him information and intelligence, which really helped him outmaneuver Jinnah. And thus Pakistan was left with a pretty sore deal, with the short end of the stick when it came to remunerations, land, etc. So I'm quite shocked that the British pretended to give the people of India a square deal. It wasn't a square deal. Partition was imperfect pretty much in every aspect you can imagine. It was bloody, it was violent, it was not judicious, and frankly, it wasn't well thought through. It was hurried. Very un-British things for the jewel of the empire, the crown jewel of the empire. But the legacy of that, whether it was your grandfather, the journalist, or my grandfather, for that matter, the first station master of Lahore, who received those ghost trains, which arrived with the people's heads missing, or people's body parts missing, or just frankly, just people dead, or raped or pillaged on the way. From both sides, the violence in the western part of the partition, in the Punjab, was remarkably different. Must be also recounted for our listeners. And we sort of forget about this because we only obsess about India versus Pakistan. But frankly, there were different corridors of independence. The Karachi, Gujarat, the Sindh Gujarat route of independence, or the Sindh Maharashtra Gujarat route of independence, the port route, and the train routes were much more secure and sane than the Punjab route, which was a very, very violent route. Yeah. That goes on to underscore how agricultural wrath of the landed parties, people whose land was split, was much more because of the arbitrariness of the partition. People's land wasn't really split in Sindh, Gujarat, Maharashtra. It was quite evenly partitioned because there's a big desert there in the middle, which frankly nobody cared about. But the Punjab experience was much more bloody because people's villages, houses, literally walls were split. Half of a village went to Pakistan, half of a village went to India. That, in a way, made the horrors of partition a very Punjab-centric experience. And for those of us who have grown up in the region, watched its movies, experienced its violence and wars, we understand that the North Indian versus Pakistani Punjabi rivalry really ends up then dominating the next 75 years, still continues to dominate both militaries, both establishments, both political cultures, because of that violent trauma of the Punjab experience of the partition, not the Sindh experience of the partition, or the Gujarat experience of the partition, or the Rajasthani experience of the partition, for that matter, the Maharashtrian experience. It's really, really a complicated divide there.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because while we try to analogize Delhi and Lahore being similar, Punjabi culture, Mughal architecture, old cities, and Bombay and Karachi being similar, commercial capitals, stock market, but you find there are similarities in Bombay, Lahore having the entertainment industry and the cricket thing, but Delhi and Karachi having the partition stories, because from Punjab, all the Hindus coming in were in Delhi, and the Muhajirs, as they say, came to Karachi. And this is where I want to ask you about Pakistan. Pakistan, 75 years, because in the international context, a lot of them wax lyrical about India. India as an identity existed in a lot of form, but Pakistan was a new form. And some would say Pakistan was more viable as a notion than a nation. And obviously, Jinnah had an idea of a Muslim homeland. But, Hussein Haqqani writes this in his book so brilliantly. He said, when Pakistan was carved out of India, it had 20% of the land, 15% of the resources, but 33% of the British India army. So most states raise an army for a threat, but in Pakistan, the army was so big. So the threat of India began. So where does India began? Does Pakistan lose out because Jinnah, its founder, who was in his early days secular, he died within a year of Pakistan creation? Was that where Pakistan lost its way and there was no one to take the wheel after that?
The thing is that Jinnah was such a larger than life personality within the idea of Pakistan, that his early departure, he was suffering from tuberculosis through his negotiations with the British and the Congress for Pakistan. He kept it a very tight secret. There's some evidence out there which indicates that he ensured that his weaknesses, his health was kept under wraps, because if people had known that this guy doesn't have much time to live, they might have carried on negotiating with him, and that would have been a very different version of events. But in a way, what's disappointing about the guy, the great leader, as the Pakistanis call him, the Qaeda-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, are contradictions. There are contradictions which you see before he lands Pakistan, and there are contradictions in that short 1 year, those first 13 months in power that he has. One contradiction, of course, is that he pushes for and founds, a homeland for the Muslims of South Asia. He's very clear about that demand. On the other hand, being a very liberal, progressive man, imbibed once in a while, played snooker, enjoyed the best Savile Row suits, etc., ends up also offering the people of Pakistan the choice of secularity in landmark speeches made around the time of partition. Goes on to say that you are free to go to your temples, and I quote, "You are free to go to your mosques, you are free to go to any place of worship in this state of Pakistan, and who you pray to, etc., is no business of the state." That sets up a very different version of events for what really happens when he goes to the East Wing, for example. Soon after his becoming the Governor General of an independent Pakistan, he goes to what would eventually become Bangladesh after a civil war in 71, and he says, "Oh, by the way, guys, your language now is going to be Urdu." Bengali is a beautiful language, but it's also a language which predates Urdu. Bengali is a language of India. Urdu sort of evolved amongst the military camps of the Mughals. Urdu literally means army in Turkish. It's a beautiful language as well, but it was the language of the western part of Pakistan. It was the language of the Western nationalists, not the Eastern nationalists. And telling half of the population, rather more than half of the population, that they have to literally switch languages is quite different from what he just said a few months earlier to the people of Pakistan, saying, "Oh, you're free to do whatever. You're free to practice. You're free to worship. You're free to do your own thing." In a way, some people have criticized Mr. Jinnah for not being a great organizer. That first year, him being, of course, a lawyer, one would have expected. Of course, he was ill. I wasn't in the room, and who can talk 75 years later about a man who's with such a towering personality and so much going on in his life in those days. But him being a lawyer, one would have expected some sort of groundwork done for a constitution. And yet, very little in that first year comes from Mr. Jinnah, apart from his speeches, of course, about what his version, his vision, his constitutionalism for Pakistan would look like. And that ends up becoming a real problem, because as soon as he dies, you go through around a decade roughly of bureaucracy, where bureaucrats end up trying to jump over each other's heads and cut off each other's legs and become the premier, try to retain the top spot for perks, privileges, and patronage. So you get a decade of bureaucrats trying to get to attain power. Then you get around a decade from 48 to 58, you get around a decade of bureaucracy. From 58 to 69, you get a decade of autocracy with the country's first martial law regime.
Ayub Khan.
And with Field Marshal Ayub Khan. And then from 68 to another 10 years, to 77, 78, you get this hyper-nationalistic Islamist Bhutto, who obviously comes in after the breakup of Pakistan and the civil war in the middle. So within the 3 decades of Jinnah's demise, because he wasn't quite clear, and if he was clear, then he was also as unclear with his follow-up ideas and speeches, you get the 3 most different 10-year-long or 8-year-long or 9-year-long experiences, a decade each roughly, if you really square it off and round it off. You get a decade of bureaucracy, autocracy, and then weirdly theocracy. And that is where it all starts tumbling down. And there's no coming back. By the time the second martial law regime under Ziaul Haq comes in, 77, 78, it's over. Pakistan is thoroughly confused, broken up, and the only stable, I guess you can say, the most organized organization in this otherwise disorganized organization by default is the military. And that is the end of that story. Because from the 70s, 80s, from the 80s onwards, the military becomes the most important, largest, most powerful, richest, most organized, most vicious, most protective player, not just on the local level or the national level, but then on the international level with the alliance with the Americans, with the CIA-run jihad in Afghanistan, and geopolitics beyond that country. I mean, come on, Pakistan becomes a frontline state in the Cold War. Pakistan delivers the killing blow for the Soviet Union. That's a pretty major deal in those 10 years of the Afghan jihad. And by that time, the country's military intelligence apparatus is not just a national player, it is an international player. And it's too big to be cut down to size. And we are seeing the effects of that status, that privilege, that power play out even today.
Interesting. I mean, Wajahat, obviously there's so much to unpack, and you've kind of chronologically gone from 47 to the 80s, 90s, where Pakistan sort of grew but also unfolded like a pack of cards. The 2 points that you picked up, which is very interesting, and I want to just take you back in time briefly. Obviously, we talk about lawyers and all of them, Jinnah, Gandhi, Nehru, Ambedkar, all lawyers. And of course, we saw that in India with Nehru was around from 47 to 63, 64 when he passed away. And John Kenneth Gabriel, the famous economist, was former US ambassador to India, remembered saying, had Nehru been a different person, India would have been a different country. And you just see the juxtaposition, because under Nehru in the emerging world, there's nowhere in the emerging world did anyone make bets. And under Nehru, there were like IITs, IIMs came, Indian space race came, a sense of constitution that Ambedkar delivered, and very stoically, even though Gandhi was assassinated shortly after, but Gandhi, was Nehru's stoicness. And I think one of the things about India that really stood out was the fact that the idea of India is so complicated, because it could have very easily balkanized, because there was nothing in common between all these states that came together, just united by a railway system the British created, because Punjabi is as different as Tamil as the way Spanish is different from Russian. But what I think really came together was the fact that even when there was a sense of regionalism in India, every state was allowed, like the fact that most people still are not aware about, India does not have one national language. Every national language is there. And I think in some ways, the unfolding of that was what you said, that Jinnah imposed Urdu on the Bengalis, and that lost East Pakistan long before 71, which even saw in Sri Lanka, what we saw right now. I mean, what we're seeing right now, and the Sinhala First Act meant that Tamils got oppressed. So in South Asia, the fact that India got it right when no one else got it right in that sense with the language. And it just showed that the fact that Indian identity was that anyone could be part of India identity. Whereas Pakistan identity was a very pan-Islamic Punjabi-ish identity, even though there were Sindhis, Baloch, Mohajirs, Pathans, but is that sort of the train of thought that Pakistan didn't create an identity beyond just we're not Indians?
I think I would not take away from the lucky streak that India got with the continuity, the stability, the gravity of the Nehru years. the 5-year plans, the very slow but steady growth, the non-aligned movement, which continues to be reflected in India's very independent policy of strategic autonomy at a time when the world was split between the two camps of the Cold War. I think, as George W. Bush would say, we can't underestimate the importance of Mr. Nehru. There are not a lot of takers of the Nehruvian ideology in present-day India, in Hindutva India. But Pakistanis look at Nehru's long reign as very enviously, not because he did something brilliant, but because he was there. A founding father of India remained in office for almost the first couple of decades. That's a pretty big deal versus the chronology of tumult, violence, and instability that Pakistan saw during those years. By the time Nehru died, Pakistan had killed off one prime minister. Jinnah was dead. One prime minister was killed off. 7 or 8 had been kicked out. A military regime had taken over, and 2 wars had already, including the first war in Kashmir and the 64-65 war, were already brewing and or had been lost. It was a complete disaster from the get-go as far as leadership and stability and continuity of leadership and chain of command is concerned from the Pakistani perspective. I don't think that the Pakistanis had the time to craft nationalist identity politics. If they had been a strong, stable leader reflecting Nehru's regime across the border, perhaps the Pakistanis would have come up with a different identity. But this is compounded by the larger challenge that the Pakistanis were the new nation. They had already had a larger feat, a higher yardstick to attain, because they were the new idea. India wasn't a new idea. India was an idea. India has been an idea for thousands of years. Nehru just put it past the colonial post, as did Gandhi and, of course, all the other friends. But Jinnah had a new idea. People bought it. He bought it. Millions bought it. Who partitioned, who migrated and kept up in the partition. But the larger idea was the two-nation theory, and that brand identity politics, that project, that mission, that operation of setting up, what does Pakistan mean? Pakistan ka matlab kya? La ilaha illallah was not a slogan which Jinnah preferred. Pakistan ka matlab kya, la ilaha illallah, for our readers or rather listeners who don't understand Urdu, means what does Pakistan mean? Pakistan ka matlab kya, la ilaha illallah, there is only one God but Allah. Jinnah was a very secular, progressive man, liked a good single malt, did not indulge in religiosity, especially sloganeering, like this. In fact, it was certain more conservative elements within the partition which came up with slogans like this and after the partition. But Pakistan didn't really have any identity from the get-go. Today, and that's reflected today, you'll be happy to know, I'm quite sad to have noted this since I was a child, that every Pakistani can sing the national anthem, but most of us don't get it because it's in Farsi.
Correct.
Which is a language of the Mughal court, whose intellectuals and rather whose descendants ended up becoming a part of the intellectual movement that led to the idea of Pakistan. That's all very good, except here's the problem. Farsi is spoken in Iran, not in Pakistan. So the national anthem is in Farsi, the national language is in Urdu, and the largest wing speaks Bengali. Obviously, the breakup was bound to happen. Obviously, it was bound to happen. And it did. Today, 220 million Pakistanis can sing the national anthem. I don't even know if 10,000 can understand what it means. I'd be surprised. I can't. And I'm from Quetta, which is near Iran. I don't understand a word of Farsi. So that's sad. And that is a failure of leadership across the board, whether it's military, whether it's civilian, whether it's intellectual, whether it's academic. That is a failure of the elites who were a part of the partition movement to sustain the mission of brand identity politics, which was a part and parcel of the two-nation theory and the formation of Pakistan.
You raise a good point. Just apocryphally, I think it's brilliant. The fact that Pakistan national anthem, I think the first original, what we know today as Qawmi Tarana or Pak Zar Zameen, written by Hafiz Jalandhari, 1950, as you rightly said, in Farsi, the language of Iran, which not intelligible to a lot of Pakistanis, even like yourself. But Jagannath Azad, a Hindu poet who wrote Urdu, was Jinnah's friend. He wrote the first anthem. And I think even though he wrote in Urdu, which is intelligible to most Pakistanis, maybe not in 47 as much as today now, I think got changed because he was a Hindu, and it just, again, a sense of cyclical. Because I want to come back to what you said about the two-nation theory, because what they say, if a Arab stops being Muslim, he's still Arab. If a Turkish stops being Muslim, he's Turk. If Iranian stop being Muslim, he's Persian. But if a Pakistani stops being Muslim, what is he? Indian. But that's antithetical of what the idea of Pakistan is supposed to be. So in this notion of nation building, and you talk about the military being the only stable institute, do you feel that the idea of being at loggerheads with India, is it the military's establishment, the fear of a larger neighbor constantly coming and invading? Is that sort of taken Pakistan down their treacherous path of almost no return? Because 75 years, it's been classic steps of 2 steps forward, 4 steps back.
Yeah, so I think the fact that Pakistan and India went to war like super early, like literally weeks after the partition, and the aftermath of that war ends up then being played out right till this minute, when both countries have the world's fastest growing nuclear arsenal. Pakistan has around 165 warheads. India has around 160. They're engaged. They've fought countless skirmishes, 4 wars combined, killed tens of hundreds of thousands of each other's citizens, somehow directly or indirectly, depending on how you want to count the cost of conflict, engaged in proxy war for decades on each other's soil and in third countries. The original sin of partition remains that first war of Kashmir, which I must remind you was from the Pakistani side championed by British commanding officers. British generals were running the Pakistani army during those first years. And the first war, which starts in September, October 47 and runs through the course of that year and into 48, that really becomes the cornerstone of Pakistan's national security state. The unfinished business of partition could have been any of the following. It could have been Junagadh, Munawwadar, Hyderabad, but ends up becoming just Kashmir. Jammu and Kashmir continue to fester as one of the Indian Union's many problems. The Indian Union has, let's just be honest, as many problems as any other regular country has. It's not the happiest, safest, most stable country in the world. But compared to Pakistan, it's a Hollywood dream. It's amazing, relatively speaking, but only relatively speaking, not in absolute terms. But why does Jammu and Kashmir end up becoming the cold sore that never really goes away and continues to fester? Well, it becomes it remains a battlefield for 75 years. And while India has the bandwidth and the capacity to man that battlefield, whether through a hot war or a simmering war or a cold war with Pakistan, through the next 7 decades, Pakistan really, as the losing party, ends up keeping a third of Kashmir, while India gets the lion's share, gets the valley, gets 2/3 of Kashmir, gets most of the population, gets most of the vital natural resources like the main riverheads, which pass through or start, frankly, from Kashmir. And now Pakistan, as the insult over injury is that Pakistan ends up then negotiating a treaty with India where effectively the crux of the Indus Water Treaty is you own our rivers, but let's just agree that you will give us water from it for humanitarian purposes. The Indus Water Treaty, by the way, remains a remarkable feat that despite wars, these two countries which hate each other have, thank the gods of peace, that treaty has remained in place and been honored through war and peace between these two warring parties. Otherwise, if there had been no Indus Waters Treaty, I shiver with fear about what would have happened to the people of South Asia. But going on, to answer your question directly, the overall overarching national security story of state survival, of pride, of Islam, of heritage, of the right thing, the unfinished business of partition becomes Kashmir. And around Kashmir, whether it's through the Operation Gibraltar in 64-65, whether it's through the 70 parts of the 71 war, the Kargil war, the Siachen conflict, the ongoing insurgency in Kashmir as stands today, the military, the national security state, the establishment, whatever you want to call them, the deep state, ends up developing a very, very important narrative that Kashmir is a part of Pakistan's. And even if it isn't, then there's a plebiscite. There was supposed to be a plebiscite there that the United Nations resolutions stand. And this, by the way, about this part, they actually have a point. There are multiple UN resolutions, but the Indians have their own claims with their own resolutions and their own counterfactuals. So instead of getting into the legalese bit, the Pakistanis sustain the kinetic bit, the bit which is worth fighting for. And that really becomes a part of the national narrative, the national story. Today, Kashmir, not a lot of Pakistanis have been to Kashmir. Not a lot of Pakistanis speak Kashmiri. The culture, food, poetry, music of Kashmir is not widely available in Pakistan. You don't see Pakistani heroes running around like Indian heroes and heroines in Bollywood do, even in yesteryear or in current productions in cinema, running around in Azad Kashmir, which is the Pakistani version of Kashmir. It's that obsession, cultural obsession is kind of missing. But really the larger obsession is a political obsession, the obsession to get equal, the obsession to get Kashmir back. And that really feeds into a larger problem with India, the problem of the forever war with India. Yeah. And I think it's not going to go away anytime soon. It's a very sad story. You can draw parallels with Palestine, or you can, and people try to in Pakistan all the time. But the Kashmir story is much more complicated.
It's far more complicated, and having done that, I think sometimes we miss the forest for the trees because we do disservice to regions by doing an analysis. And we've done this with Nagorno-Karabakh, Armenia, Azerbaijan as well. And, Wajahat, you mentioned a few points, and a few things stick in my mind. One of those is what I think the best line, and not to get into the legalese of, UN resolution, because that's where India has a claim. Pakistan tries to counterfactual that as well, because Khurshid Kasuri, Pakistan's former foreign minister, perhaps said the best thing that I think both India and Pakistan have missed. He said in his book, Neither Hawk Nor Dove, he said, look, our part of Kashmir we have, you can't get. India, and India, like your part of Kashmir you have, we can't get. So we got to move on. I think that's almost a clarion call, which is true, because the Italian concept of irredentism, which means claiming land that you once belonged, is not going to exist. We sort of flirted with the Musharraf 4-point idea, which lasted as long as Musharraf did in government, as you know. Neither India or Pakistan is going to get that. And I think secretly the Indian government knows that, but except in India, in Indian lexicon, Kashmir is an integral part of India, as we say, our two tongue. And in Pakistan thing, you call it the jugular vein. And I think, is there a way, like, as you say, if Kashmir is unfinished part of partition, is that almost saying that 75 years Pakistan is still not complete, because in what's gone on for 75 years, then, it's almost like waiting for Superman to arrive, and that's never going to happen.
Well, the only way any resolution to the Kashmir conflict, the Kashmir dispute, the Kashmir war, whatever you want to call it, the competition for Kashmir is going to be achieved at this rate, is going to be via negotiations between Islamabad and New Delhi. Let's just come to terms with that. If we think that Kashmir will be settled by conventional war, then we're smoking some very high-grade quality narcotics. If we think that nuclear weapons will provide that mileage to either country, we're obviously quite mad. But to really put it to rest, every time the Pakistanis and the Indians have considered talking about Kashmir, it's been under two conditions. One, when both sides are doing well and are in the mood to settle affairs, or when both sides have engaged in some sort of conflict and really want to ease things off. So thus, there have been, in a way, there have been two tracks in terms of taking a breather about Kashmir. There's been the ceasefire track, which we see it after the 47-48 war with the ceasefire line, which becomes the line of control. Then we see it after the Shastri-Ayub Khan talks, which were in Tashkent, which underscore the ceasefire line. Then we see it with during the Musharraf era in the 2000s, and now the recent ceasefire under the Bajwa Modi era, when cross-border shelling had really affected and in fact suspended daily life on both sides of the line of control. So Pakistanis and Indians tend to do ceasefires when, as they say, the fit really hits the shan. Okay, that's the one time when they do ceasefires. But resolutions, that's a whole other conversation. And resolutions, or trying to get to or close to a resolution. And the last time we came close to one, as you pointed out, and as Mr. Kasuri has pointed out in his book, which is a remarkably important book, but it's so long that not a lot of people get through it, is that during the Musharraf years, there was almost an agreement which was snatched out of the mouth of impossibility by the Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and the Pakistani President Pervez Musharraf. But I hearken to remind our listeners that it was during those days when both countries were doing reasonably well. Pakistan was actually going through a economic boom during the mid-2000s. India was doing reasonably well as well. The global financial crisis, the GFC of 2008, hadn't really come in. Musharraf really hadn't been kicked out. The Indian National Congress was firmly in play. Things were okay. Things were good. India was being led by the same guy who devised its economic reforms in the 90s and thus was comfortably growing. And Pakistan was comfortably growing as well, fighting its war on terror quite successfully, one would say, and a period of relative peace, stability, and calm, and frankly, serious growth. And that's when they were encouraged by other friends and partners like the United States to talk, and they were talking. I don't think that situation is going to come anytime soon. Both countries need to be doing well. Both countries need to be in a position to enjoy the benefits of peace, of trade, of partnership, and both countries need common friends and interlocutors who are not necessarily brokers for peace, but definitely common friends and advisors who are sort of nudging both of them on. Currently, India is in a position that it will and it is doing well with or without Pakistan. In fact, in India, currently, if you are Narendra Modi, it's probably more fashionable and politically viable to be at war with Pakistan than at peace with Pakistan. That probably gets you more votes in nationalist India today. Similarly, in the Pakistan of Bajwa and Imran Khan, you're probably better off fighting the Indians or pushing the anti-Indian narrative than pushing the peace card. That is where the two countries are. The nationalist experiments in the two countries are so mature now, they're so ripe, and they're so overcooked. The nationalism card is so, I guess you can say, pervasive that any bid for peace right now, firstly, is a long shot, and secondly, really depends on how both could benefit. I don't see India benefiting from a peace deal with Pakistan. I see India benefiting from a ceasefire in Kashmir. I see the Pakistanis benefiting and getting some breathing room from a ceasefire with a largely superior force, but for the sake of the Kashmiri people. But I don't see a resolution anytime soon because the political constituencies in both countries, frankly, would rather fight or would rather hate, at the very least, than make peace.
Wajahat, as we approach our final 6 minutes, I think Michael McFaul wrote this book as far as US and Russia is concerned. It's called From Cold War to Hot Peace. And I think the word I picked up was hot peace. I think that's ironically where India and Pakistan are sadly best at, because when Khurshid Kasuri spoke about the most propitious period, if you look at every time we had propitious period in India-Pakistan relation, something happened that shifts the apple carts to the specter of war. You can just look back with Prime Minister Vajpayee taking the bus ride to Lahore, signing the Lahore Declaration. Then you've got the Kargil conflict. Then you've gotten Musharraf coming for the Agra summit. Then you had the attacks on the Indian Parliament and Operation Parakram with, Fauj on both sides staring at each other. Then you had a propitious period, 04-07. Then you have the Bombay attacks. And then it just goes to a spectre war. And then you had Article 370 where Pakistan raised the tensions. And I mean, this is, sad to say, Stephen Cohen's prophecy of a 100-year war is fairly true, because 75 years the script has been written. The next 25 years, we're at Nadir right now. India and Pakistan have downgraded diplomatic ties. Since 2019, there's been no Indian High Commissioner in Pakistan and no Pakistani High Commissioner in India. It's unlikely there's going to be any, a black swan event like the Cold War, Berlin Wall falling down, Cold War ending, that really changes the narrative that in the subcontinent, right, at this point.
Yeah, I think the only way to perpetuate the end of Mr. Cohen's prophecy would be a serious change from within either polity. I don't think that either polity is looking towards any sort of massive changes. In Pakistan, the military is firmly the largest, most important, most powerful political player. It is not a political party, but pretty much acts like one in so many ways. And it can, because of its leadership's incentives, it can become more reconcilable when it comes to talking to India. Most certainly, Mr. Modi is not going anywhere anytime soon. The Indian opposition is weak. The Indian media is feeble. Indian civil society is compromised, which makes Mr. Modi even stronger than ever. And again, his right-wing credentials are only embellished when he bears his fangs at Pakistan and sends jets across the border. Even if they get shot down, he still wins. He wins either way by taking on Pakistan. So to perpetuate the end of Mr. Cohen's prophecy, I frankly don't think that any change is likely, unless, of course, there is, through common friends, there is a voice of reason, which perpetuates both sides to talk. And for that matter, by the way, there is an ongoing, as you know, there is an ongoing back channel going on between the Indians and the Pakistanis that has led to relative stability on the eastern border right now. There is an understanding about controlling common threats like ISIS. There is an understanding about controlling common threats like Al-Qaeda. And there is an understanding about working together in Afghanistan, which is why the Indians have recently started engaging with the Taliban. And the Taliban have just today, in fact, offered to provide security to the Indian diplomatic mission. So you can already see that sometimes when they're pushed along and when the right people are in the right positions, they can talk. But overall, I think the die is cast. The two countries have achieved a level of identity, politics, identity, nationalism, where it's not just about fun and games anymore. It's not just a cricket rivalry. I think the competition is visceral. I think religiosity plays an important element. I think nationalism is a dangerous development. Hyper-nationalism is a very dangerous development on the Indian side, and religious nationalism is a very dangerous development on the Pakistani side. Those are not going away anytime soon. Anything with Allah or Bhagwan, involving Allah or Bhagwan, cannot be easily rescinded from the political bits, and this is very disappointing, because, with due respect to Mr. Cohen, I don't think this is going to be a 100-year war. I think the die is cast in a way where, with India and Pakistan, regardless of stability, this is going to be the perpetual war, the forever war. This is the war which will continue through our lives, because that's the way the two countries have now carved a place for themselves and each other in modern history.
Yeah, absolutely, Wajahat. There's so much to unpack, and I think 75 years is normally a lifetime. It's a milestone. Years for celebration. Both India and Pakistan celebrate 75 years of the independent India existence, but despite that, there is never said to be a more, fraught times in the subcontinent, although there's no war. But, as Bill Clinton once called it, the most dangerous part of the world. And, who'd argue less, even though, as you rightly said, we have had some progress, say, the Indus Water Treaty, and despite nuclear weapons, water still flows. However, there's still common threats, as you rightly said, and none more so than climate change, which affects us all individually. So, Wajahat Khan, thank you so much for a riveting conversation and so much to unpack. And, I don't think 75 minutes is justice to 75 years of history, but I think it's probably just saying that, there's more moroseness than optimism right now in the subcontinent.
Thanks, man. And I hope we get past this. And I think there's no better way really to discuss India and Pakistan 75 years after the fact than between an Indian and a Pakistani. So yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Pleasure's all mine, Wajahat. Thanks, buddy.
And with that, we bring this episode of The Global Detail to a close. The noted South Asia scholar Stephen Cohen argued that the rivalry between India and Pakistan has proven to be one of the world's most intractable international conflicts since 1947, and will continue for 100 years. Sadly, at 75 years in, it's hard to prove otherwise. Until next time. This podcast has been a production of Calcutta Media in association with Perspicacity Media, LLC. All guest views are their own. If you have any questions, thoughts, or concerns, email us at globaldetailpodcast@gmail.com, or you can contact us on Facebook and Twitter at Global Detail Pod. This recording, or any portion thereof, may not be reproduced or used in any manner whatsoever without the express written permission of the publisher, except for the use of brief quotations in a review. Copyright 2022 by Calcutta Media, LLC. All rights reserved.